A crystal glass shatters in a billionaire's bare hand and nobody in that ballroom knows why. Blood drips onto marble floors as 500 guests stern silent. One woman in an emerald gown just walked into the wrong party in front of the wrong man, wearing the one thing he never expected: freedom. Before we go any further,
If this story already has your attention, hit subscribe, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from, and stay with me until the very end. Let's see how far this story travels.
the glass didn't just break, it exploded. Ethan Blackwood stood at the edge of the Lancaster ballroom, a shard of crystal buried in his palm, whiskey running down his wrist like something spilled from a wound that had been open for 5 years. He didn't flinch. He didn't look down. His eyes were fixed on the woman who had just walked through the doors like she owned the room. She wasn't even supposed to be in. "Sir, you're bleeding." His assistant Marcus whispered, already reaching for a napkin. Ethan didn't answer. He just kept staring. Charlotte Bennett stood at the top of the marble staircase in an emerald gown that didn't ask for attention, it simply refused to be ignored. 3 years of silence. 3 years of rebuilding a life from the wreckage of a divorce that had once made her the punchline of every society column in New York. 3 years of dull grays, safe blacks, invisibility by choice. Tonight, she wore color. And the room stopped breathing. "Who is that?" someone whispered, near the bar. "That's Charlotte Bennett," a woman answered, scandal already dancing in her voice. "The one who used to be married into the Whitmore family. I heard she runs some charity now. She looks incredible. She looks dangerous." Charlotte heard none of it. She was too busy reminding herself to breathe, to smile, to walk like a woman who belonged, because for 3 years she had convinced herself she didn't belong anywhere near rooms like this one. She hadn't expected the invitation. Lancaster Corporation had never once acknowledged her existence. Not since the divorce, not since her name became something people said in hushed, pitying tones. But the envelope had arrived a week ago, cream-colored, embossed, addressed directly to her. Charlotte Bennett, founder, Bennett Foundation for Children. Someone had remembered her work. Someone had finally seen her as more than a cautionary tale. She had no idea that someone was about to become the least of her problems. Charlotte. A warm voice, achingly familiar in its confidence. Adrian Lancaster appeared at the base of the staircase, offering his arm like it was the most natural gesture in the world. "You have no idea how long I've wanted to meet the woman behind the headlines, Mr. Lancaster." She placed her hand lightly on his sleeve, forcing her voice to stay steady. "I didn't expect such a personal welcome. Please, Adrian." His smile was easy, practiced, the kind that belonged to a man who had never once been told no. "Tonight, you're not just a guest. You're the most interesting person in this building." Across the ballroom, Ethan's jaw tightened so hard Marcus actually stepped back. "Sir, your hand." "I'm fine," Ethan said. Voice flat, cold, final. He wasn't fine. He hadn't been fine since the moment Charlotte's name appeared on tonight's guest list, a list he had personally reviewed, a list he had personally allowed. Because some foolish, arrogant part of him had wanted to see her again. He just hadn't accounted for what it would feel like watching another man's hand settle at the small of her back. "You know her?" Marcus asked quietly, wrapping a handkerchief around Ethan's bleeding palm. Ethan said nothing. 5 years of watching from a careful, deliberate distance. 5 years of pretending the check that quietly cleared her foundation's debts had come from an anonymous donor. 5 years of telling himself that loving Charlotte Bennett from the shadows was a kindness, not a cowardice. Tonight, standing in a room full of the city's most powerful people, watching Adrian Lancaster lead her toward the senators and the cameras like a prize, he intended to keep Ethan realized exactly how wrong he had been. "Champagne, Miss Bennett?" Adrian asked, plucking the glasses from a passing tray. "Thank you." Charlotte accepted the glass, scanning the room out of habit, cataloging exits the way she'd learned to during the worst months of her divorce. Old instincts. Instincts that had never fully gone away. That's when she saw him. Ethan Blackwood, standing perfectly still in the middle of a room full of movement, a bloodied handkerchief wrapped around his hand. His eyes locked on her with an intensity that made the champagne turn to ice in her stomach. He wasn't supposed to be here. Or no. Of course he was here. This was Lancaster's Gala, but Ethan Blackwood belonged in every room that mattered in this city. She just hadn't expected to see him tonight. She hadn't expected the way her chest tightened at the sight of him, the way 3 years of careful distance collapsed in a single, unbearable second. "You know Blackwood?" Adrian asked, following her gaze, something sharpening behind his easy smile. "We're old family friends," Charlotte said carefully. Adrian's smile widened in a way that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Is that what they're calling it these days? Excuse me? Nothing?" He guided her deeper into the crowd, deliberately, purposefully, positioning himself between her and Ethan's line of sight. "Come. There's someone from the Senate Finance Committee I think you'll want to meet. Your foundation could use friends like him." Charlotte let herself be led, telling herself this was exactly why she'd come for the foundation. For the children who depended on funding she had spent 3 years scraping together dollar by dollar. Not for the man standing across the room with blood on his hand and something unspoken burning behind his eyes. But she felt his gaze the entire time, like heat against her back. "Sir, people are starting to notice you're just standing here," Marcus murmured, glancing nervously at the small cluster of reporters already angling their cameras toward Ethan's unmoving figure. "Maybe you should get me a drink," Ethan said. "You just destroyed one." "Get me another." Marcus hesitated, then disappeared toward the bar, leaving Ethan alone with a view he couldn't tear himself away from Charlotte laughing. Politely, carefully, at something Adrian had said, her hand still resting on his arm like it belonged there. It didn't belong there. Ethan knew that with a certainty that startled him. He had spent 5 years convincing himself he had no right to that place beside her, watching another man occupy it effortlessly, casually. Like it cost him nothing, something inside Ethan's chest cracked in a way boardrooms and hostile takeovers had never managed to crack him. Ethan Blackwood. A senator's wife appeared at his elbow, delighted. "I didn't expect to see you mingling tonight. You're usually hiding in some corner with your phone." "Just observing," Ethan said, forcing civility into his voice. "Observing Charlotte Bennett, from the looks of it." The woman's eyes glittered with the particular delight of someone who had just found tomorrow's gossip. "She's stunning tonight, isn't she?" "Adrian certainly seems to think so." Ethan's jaw ticked. "Excuse me." He didn't wait for a response. He moved through the crowd with the deliberate, controlled walk of a man who had built an empire on never losing control, and yet every step brought him closer to the one thing that had always been able to unravel him completely. Charlotte felt him before she saw him. A shift in the air, a weight settling over the conversation like a held breath. "Ethan," she said, and his name came out oftener than she intended. Older than 3 years, warmer than she wanted it to be. "Charlotte." His voice was rough, low, controlled in a way that suggested enormous effort. His eyes dropped briefly to the emerald silk of her gown before returning, with visible discipline, to her face. "You look." He stopped himself. "I look what?" she asked, and something in her voice dared him to finish the sentence. Adrian's hand tightened almost imperceptibly against her back. "Blackwood. Didn't expect you to leave your corner tonight. Didn't expect you to be so." "Hands-on with a guest," Ethan replied, and the temperature between the two men dropped by several degrees. "Charlotte isn't just any guest," Adrian said smoothly. "She's brilliant. Her foundation has done more good in 3 years than most of the people in this room have done in a lifetime. I intend to make sure she knows the Lancaster family recognizes that." "How generous of you," Ethan said, each word precise, controlled, dangerous. "Ethan." Charlotte's voice carried a warning now, quiet and firm. "Please." He looked at her, then really looked at her, and for one unguarded second, 5 years of careful distance nearly collapsed completely in the middle of a crowded ballroom. She saw something flicker behind his eyes that she hadn't seen since before her divorce. Since before everything fell apart. Since before she'd convinced herself the version of Ethan who once looked at her like that had only ever existed in her imagination. "Enjoy your evening, Ms. Bennett," Ethan said finally, voice tight, formal, wrong in every way that mattered. He turned and walked away before she could respond. Before he could say something he couldn't take back in front of half the city's most powerful people. Marcus got up to him near the terrace doors, holding a fresh drink Ethan didn't touch. "Sir, what was that?" "Nothing," Ethan said, staring out at the dark New York skyline, his bandaged hand curling into a fist at his side. "With respect, sir, that did not look like nothing." Ethan didn't answer, because the truth was too complicated to explain to anyone, even himself. The truth was that watching Charlotte Bennett walk into that ballroom tonight in a color that finally matched the fire he'd always known was buried inside her, the truth was that he had spent 5 years protecting her from a distance, believing silence was the same thing as love. Tonight, for the first time, silence felt like the worst mistake of his life. Behind him, the orchestra shifted into a new song. And across the ballroom, Adrian Lancaster leaned close to Charlotte Sear and whispered something that made her laugh bright, genuine, effortless. Ethan's glass, the second one Marcus had brought him, cracked quietly in his hand. He didn't even notice. Adrian's whisper lingered too long against Charlotte's ear, and she pulled back half a step, laughing to cover the discomfort crawling up her spine. "You're terrible," she said, keeping her own light. "I'm honest," Adrian corrected, eyes flicking toward the terrace doors where Ethan had disappeared minutes earlier. "Something not everyone in this room can claim." Charlotte followed his gaze, but saw nothing except waiters weaving through tuxedos and gowns. "What does that mean?" "Nothing." Adrian's smile returned, smooth as poured glass. "Come, there's a senator I promised you'd charm." She let him steer her forward, though something in his tone stayed lodged in her chest like a splinter. By the bar, Marcus was still watching Ethan with barely concealed alarm. "Sir, you cracked another glass." "I noticed," Ethan muttered, setting the ruined tumbler down before the stem could snap completely. "That's due in 20 minutes. People are starting to talk. Let them, sir." "I said let them, Marcus." Ethan's voice came out sharper than he intended, and he immediately regretted it, dragging a hand down his face. "I'm sorry. That wasn't fair." Marcus softened instantly. He'd worked for Ethan Blackwood for 6 years and had never once seen the man apologize for anything, let alone atone. "It's fine, sir. But whatever this is, whoever this is, it's eating you alive in real time, in front of cameras." Ethan's eyes cut toward the ballroom floor, where Charlotte's emerald gown caught the chandelier light like something deliberately designed to torture him. "It's not what you think." "I don't think anything, sir. I'm just telling you what I see." What Marcus saw, and what half the room was beginning to notice, was a man who had built one of the most feared empires in American finance, a man who negotiated hostile takeovers without blinking, who had once sat across from a Senate subcommittee without breaking a sweat, unraveling over a woman in green silk laughing at another man's jokes. Across the room, that laugh had started to feel like a performance to Charlotte, too. Every time Adrian introduced her to someone new, his hand found the small of her back. And every time she found herself stepping subtly away, resetting the distance, only for him to close it again a few minutes later. "Senator Hayes," Adrian said warmly, guiding her toward a silver-haired man in his 60s. "This is Charlotte Bennett, the woman I told you about." "The Bennett Foundation." "Ah, the children's charity." Senator Hayes shook her hand firmly. "Impressive work, Miss Bennett. I read your last funding report. You've done more with less than half our federal programs manage with triple the budget." That means a great deal, Senator. Charlotte felt something loosen in her chest. This, at least, was real. This was why she'd come. We could use partners who understand that. Then let's talk numbers. Hayes gestured toward a quieter corner. Adrian, you don't mind if I steal her for a moment? Of course not. Adrian's smile didn't waver, but something behind his eyes flickered with irritation before he masked it. I'll be right here. As Charlotte walked away with the senator, she felt, for the first time all evening, like herself, not a headline, not a scandal, not a woman standing beside the wrong man for the cameras. Just Charlotte, the woman who had built something real out of the wreckage of her old life. It didn't last, Ms. Bennett. A reporter appeared at her elbow the moment Senator Hayes stepped away to take a call. Camera already raised. Sarah Kim. City Wire. Mind if I ask a few questions? I'm actually in the middle of. Just quick ones. Sarah's smile was polished, professional, predatory. How does it feel being back in society after everything with the Whitmore divorce? Charlotte's spine straightened. I'd rather talk about my foundation. If you don't mind, of course. But people are curious, especially given the way Adrian Lancaster's been keeping you close all night. Any truth to the rumors that the Lancaster and Whitmore families are looking to align through you? The question landed like a slap. There's no truth to that at all. I'm here for my foundation. That's the only reason. And Ethan Blackwood. Sarah's eyes gleamed, sensing blood. I saw the way he was watching you earlier. Care to comment on your relationship with him? There's no relationship to comment on. Charlotte kept her voice even, though her heart had begun hammering. Mr. Blackwood is a family friend, nothing more. Interesting, Sarah said, already typing something into her phone. Because he shattered to glasses tonight, watching you dance with the enemy. Charlotte felt the floor tilt slightly beneath her heels. I haven't danced with anyone tonight. Not yet. Sarah's smile sharpened. The night's still young. Miss Bennett. She walked away before Charlotte could respond, leaving her standing alone in the middle of a ballroom that suddenly felt far too large, far too bright, far too exposed. Across the room, Ethan watched the exchange without hearing a word of it, and something in Charlotte's posture, the way her shoulders had gone rigid, the way her hand had tightened around her champagne glass, told him exactly what kind of conversation had just taken place. That's Sarah Kim, Marcus said grimly, following his gaze. She writes for City Wire. If she's cornered Ms. Bennett, there's a headline coming by morning, and it won't be flattering. Ethan's jaw tightened. Get me eyes on whatever she publishes before it goes live. Sir, I can't just. Marcus. I'll make some calls, Marcus sighed, already reaching for his phone. By the time Adrian returned from his call, Charlotte had composed herself into something resembling calm, though her hands hadn't quite stopped trembling. Everything all right? He asked, studying her face with unsettling attentiveness. Fine, she lied. Just a reporter with too many questions. Sarah Kim? Adrian's mouth curved. She's relentless. Don't let her rattle you. I'm not rattled. Good. He offered his arm again, and this time she hesitated before taking it. The earlier warmth between them replaced by something more calculating on his side and more cautious on hers. The orchestra's about to begin the evening's main dance. Traditionally, the host's family opens the floor. I'm not part of your family, Adrian. No, he agreed, something unreadable passing behind his expression. But you will be dancing with me tonight. It's already been announced. Charlotte's stomach dropped. Announced? By whom? Does it matter? Adrian's smile turned deliberate. Sharp beneath its charm. Everyone's watching Charlotte. Might as well give them something worth watching. Before she could argue, the orchestra's first notes rippled through the ballroom, and the crowd began to part instinctively, clearing a wide circle on the dance floor, all eyes turning toward Adrian and the woman on his arm. On the far side of the room, Ethan felt his entire body go cold. "Sir," Marcus said quietly, phone still in hand, "you should probably sit this one out." Ethan didn't answer. He was already moving toward the edge of the dance floor, every controlled instinct in his body screaming at him to stop, and every uncontrolled piece of his heart refusing to listen. Charlotte caught his eye across the circle of guests just as Adrian's hand settled firmly against her waist. And for one unbearable second, she saw something in Ethan's expression she had never seen before in 5 years of careful, practiced distance. He looked like a man watching something get taken from him in real time. The music swelled. Adrian pulled her gently into position. And somewhere behind them, a phone buzzed in Marcus's pocket with a preview headline that hadn't gone live yet, one that would, within the hour, change everything. The music swelled around them, and Adrian's hand tightened at her waist with a confidence that felt more like ownership than partnership. Charlotte kept her chin high, her feet moving through the steps on pure muscle memory, refusing to let 500 watching eyes see how badly her hands were shaking. "Relax," Adrian murmured against her ear, close enough that the gesture would read as intimate to every camera in the room. "You're doing beautifully." "I don't like this," Charlotte whispered back, forcing a practiced smile onto her face. "The dance, the whispering, any of it." "Then why are you still smiling?" "Because walking off this floor right now would make tomorrow's headlines even worse." Adrian's laugh was low, private, deliberately staged for the crowd. "You're smarter than most people give you credit for. You'd be surprised what people give me credit for these days." He spun her, slow and theatrical. And when she came back around, her eyes found Ethan instantly still standing at the edge of the floor, motionless, a man carved from stone except for the fury burning behind his eyes. Marcus appeared at his shoulder, phone screen glowing. "Sir, the preview headline just came through from my contact at City Wire." "Later," Ethan said without looking away from the dance floor. "Sir, I really think you need to see this now." "I said later, Marcus." Marcus swallowed whatever he'd been about to say and pocketed the phone, though his jaw stayed tight with worry. On the floor, Adrian leaned in again, his mouth close to Charlotte's ear, and this time he wasn't performing for the cameras. His voice dropped low enough that only she could hear it. "Tell me something, Charlotte. Does Ethan Blackwood know you're only pretending not to feel anything right now?" Charlotte's spine went rigid. "Excuse me. I've been watching you both all night." Adrian's smile never wavered, even as his words turned razor sharp. "The way you keep finding him across the room. The way your voice changes every time you say his name. I'm not blind, and neither is half this ballroom." "There's nothing between Ethan and me," she said, too fast, too defensive. "Then why does saying that make you flinch?" The photographers along the edge of the floor chose that exact moment to surge forward, cameras raised, capturing Adrian's mouth close to her ear. Her stricken expression, the perfect illusion of a couple lost in a private moment. The images hit the giant screens flanking the ballroom seconds later. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Ethan's hand, still wrapped in Marcus's makeshift bandage, curled into a fist so tight his knuckles went white beneath the fabric. "Sir." Marcus's voice had lost all its earlier hesitation. "That's it. That's the moment. This is what's going in tomorrow's paper. I don't care about the paper," Ethan said, though his voice had gone dangerously quiet. "You should. Because the headline my contact sent me isn't about tonight." Marcus finally pushed the phone into Ethan's line of sight, forcing him to look. "It's about 5 years ago." Ethan's eyes dropped to the screen, and whatever composure he had left drained instantly from his face. "Exclusive who really saved the Bennett Foundation? Anonymous donor records point to Blackwood Family Trust." "How," Ethan said slowly, "did they get this?" "I don't know, sir. But if it's true, and if it goes live tonight, everyone in this ballroom, is about to find out exactly why you've been falling apart all evening. Ethan's stomach dropped. 5 years of careful, deliberate secrecy gone, potentially, in the span of one late-night article. He'd buried that transaction under layers of shell trusts and anonymous filings specifically so Charlotte would never feel indebted to him. Never feel like her independence had a price tag with his name on it. If it came out now in the middle of Adrian's calculated performance, it would look like exactly the wrong thing. It would look like manipulation, like control, like the very thing he'd spent 5 years trying not to be. On the dance floor, the music finally slowed toward its final measures, and Adrian pulled back from Charlotte with a satisfied smile, as if he'd just won something enormous. "Thank you for the dance," he said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. His voice smooth and gracious. "You're every bit as captivating as they said." Charlotte forced a nod, her pulse still hammering from his earlier words. From the photographers, from the growing, suffocating sense that she'd become a piece on a board in a game she didn't understand the rules to. "Adrian," her voice came out sharper than intended, "what exactly are you trying to accomplish tonight?" His smile faltered just barely, just long enough for her to catch it. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." For a moment, something almost honest flickered behind his eyes, something that looked, for just a second, like guilt. Then it vanished, replaced by his usual polished charm. "Let's just say I'm curious how far certain people are willing to go to protect what they think belongs to them." "I don't belong to anyone," Charlotte said, low and fierce. "No," Adrian agreed, studying her with new interest. "I don't suppose you do." Before she could press further, applause erupted around them as the orchestra transitioned into the next piece, and the moment shattered into a dozen new conversations, new introductions, new hands reaching for her attention. Charlotte barely registered any of it. Her eyes had already found Ethan again, and this time he wasn't looking away. He was walking toward her, straight across the ballroom floor, past reporters, past photographers, past Lancaster executives who scrambled to get out of his path. Ethan Blackwood moved with the terrifying focus of a man who had run out of patience for silence. "Sir, wait," Marcus called after him, but Ethan didn't slow down. Guests parted instinctively, sensing something about to happen, phones rising in unison to capture whatever came next. Charlotte watched him approach, her heart climbing into her throat, torn between the urge to run and the desperate, aching need to finally hear whatever he'd been holding back for 5 years. "Ethan," she said as he reached her, his eyes dark, unreadable, burning. "What are you?" "I need to talk to you," he said, voice low, rough, stripped of every ounce of the careful control he'd maintained all night. "Now alone. This isn't the time." "It's exactly the time." His gaze flicked briefly toward Adrian, who watched the exchange with an expression caught somewhere between satisfaction and alarm, before returning to her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Because if I don't say this now, I don't think I'll ever say it." The orchestra swelled behind them. Cameras clicked in a steady, relentless rhythm. And somewhere across the ballroom, Marcus stood frozen, phone still clutched in his hand, watching the headline he hadn't managed to stop begin quietly uploading itself to the internet. Charlotte searched Ethan's face, 5 years of unspoken questions rising in her throat all at once. "Say what, Ethan?" His jaw tightened. His bandaged hand flexed at his side. "Everything," he said. "I need to tell you everything." "Everything," Ethan said again, quieter this time, like the word itself cost him something. "Not here." Charlotte glanced around at the 100 faces pretending not to watch them, at the phones angled just slightly in their direction, at Adrian standing a few feet away with his arms crossed and an unreadable expression carved into his face. "Fine," she said. "Not here." She let Ethan guide her away from the crowd, his hand hovering near her back without touching her, as if he'd lost the right to that gesture years ago and hadn't decided whether he was allowed to claim it back. Behind them, the orchestra kept playing, and the ballroom kept buzzing, And somewhere in the current of gossip already spreading table to table, Sarah Kim was typing furiously into her phone. "Marcus," Ethan said over his shoulder, voice tight, "kill that story. Whatever it takes." "Sir, I already tried. It's coded to auto-publish," and Marcus checked his watch, wincing. 11 minutes. "Then you have 11 minutes. Marcus took off toward a quieter corner of the ballroom. Phone pressed to his ear, leaving Ethan and Charlotte alone at the edge of the terrace doors, the noise of the party dimming behind glass and distance. "Ethan, you're scaring me," Charlotte said, her voice dropping into something raw, more honest than the polished tone she'd worn all night. "What is going on? Why did you break 2 glasses tonight? Why are you looking at me?" Like she stopped herself, swallowing the rest of the sentence. "Like what? Like you're about to lose something." Ethan's throat worked. For a man who negotiated billion-dollar mergers without blinking, he looked, in that moment, utterly out of his depth. "Because I am. I have been for the last 3 hours, watching Adrian put his hands on you, like he has some kind of claim, watching you smile at things he says that I know aren't funny. Watching the whole city decide you belong to the Lancaster family instead of." He stopped. "Instead of what?" Charlotte pressed, stepping closer despite every instinct telling her to protect herself from whatever answer came next. "Finish the sentence, Ethan, for once in 5 years. Finish the sentence." "Instead of nothing," he said, and the honesty of it seemed to hurt him physically. "Because I never gave myself the right to finish that sentence. Not with you. Not after everything you went through." "What does that mean?" Ethan dragged a hand through his hair, and for the first time all night, the mask of composure fully slipped. 5 years ago, when the divorce happened, when the Whitmores tried to bury your name and your foundation along with it, do you remember how the debts just disappeared? How the lawsuits against your charity suddenly lost funding? How the board that was trying to force you out just quietly backed off? Charlotte's chest tightened. "I always thought that was luck. Or maybe some anonymous donor who believed in the work. It wasn't luck." The words hit her like a physical blow. "What are you saying?" "I paid it," Ethan said, voice breaking slightly on the confession he'd held inside for half a decade. "All of it. The debts. The legal fees. The funding gap that would have shut your foundation down within 6 months. I set up a trust so it would never trace back to me. I turned down to deals with Whitmore-affiliated investors because taking their money would have meant sitting across a table from the people trying to destroy you." Charlotte's hand rose to her mouth. "Ethan, I never told you because I didn't want you to feel like you owed me anything." He continued, the words spilling faster now, like a dam finally giving way. "I didn't want you to think some man had swooped in to fix your life the way another man had once controlled it. You deserve to rebuild something that was entirely yours. So I stayed quiet. I stayed in the background. I told myself that loving you from a distance was enough. That it was the right thing to do. And now?" Charlotte's voice trembled, tears gathering at the edges of her eyes that she refused to let fall in front of half the city. "Now I'm standing here watching you dance with a man who's using you as a weapon against me, and I realize I was wrong." Ethan's eyes locked onto hers, dark and unguarded in a way she had never once seen in 5 years of careful friendship. "Silence was never protection, Charlotte. It was cowardice. I was so afraid of becoming another man who controlled your life that I let you believe you were alone when you weren't. Not once. Not for a single day." Charlotte felt the ground shift beneath her heels, 5 years of assumptions collapsing all at once. "All this time," she whispered. "Every good thing that happened after the divorce, the funding, the lawsuits disappearing, the board backing off, that was you. Every bit of it. Why didn't you just tell me?" "Because I was terrified," Ethan admitted, and the confession seemed to cost him more than any business deal he'd ever closed. "Terrified that if I told you, you'd see it as another man trying to buy his way into your life. Terrified that you'd hate me for hiding it. Terrified, honestly, that you didn't feel the same way, and telling you would just be one more loss I couldn't survive. Charlotte's breath caught. And now, tonight? What changed, Adrian? Ethan said simply. Watching him put his hands on you, watching you laugh at things that weren't funny. Watching this entire city decide your story before you got the chance to tell it yourself, I realized silence had already cost me 5 years. I wasn't going to let it cost me one more night. Behind them, faint through the terrace glass, the orchestra shifted into a new, slower piece. And the muffled hum of ballroom conversation carried on, oblivious to the quiet devastation happening just outside its reach. I need you to know something, Charlotte said finally, her voice shaking but steady in its conviction. These last 3 years rebuilding everything, I told myself I did it alone, that I earned every inch of it myself. And in some ways I still believe that the work, the late nights, the fights I had with lawyers and board members, that was all mine. But knowing you were there, quietly making sure I never fell completely, knowing you sacrificed deals and relationships to protect something you never once tried to take credit for. Her voice broke. Charlotte. Let me finish, she said, wiping quickly at her eyes. I spent 3 years thinking I had to prove I didn't need anyone. And this whole time, the one person who actually believed in me enough to protect me without asking for anything in return was standing 3 feet away at every gala, every fundraiser, every board meeting, saying nothing. I'm sorry, Ethan said, and it sounded like the truest thing he'd said all night. Don't be sorry. Charlotte stepped closer. Close enough now that the noise of the ballroom faded entirely behind the pounding of her own heartbeat. Just don't stay silent again. Ethan's hand rose slowly, hesitantly, brushing a strand of hair back from her face with a tenderness that contradicted every headline ever written about his ruthless business reputation. I don't intend to. Through the terrace glass, unnoticed by either of them, Marcus reappeared at the edge of the ballroom, phone pressed to his ear, his face draining of color as he listened to whatever his contact was telling him. He hung up slowly, staring across the room at Ethan and Charlotte, silhouetted together against the dark glass of the terrace doors. Too late, he murmured to himself. It already went live, inside his pocket. His phone buzzed again, and again, and again, notifications stacking on top of each other faster than he could read them. Each one carrying the same headline, now spreading across every screen in the ballroom behind him. Marcus's phone kept buzzing until he finally silenced it. But by then the damage, if it was damage at all, had already rippled through the ballroom like a current no one could stop. Guests near the bar were tilting their screens toward each other. A senator's wife gasped audibly. Sarah Kim stood near the champagne fountain, smiling at her own phone like she'd just won something. Sir, Marcus finally pushed through the terrace doors. Breathless. It's Liv. The story. Everyone's reading it right now. Ethan turned, Charlotte still close beside him, her hand instinctively finding his arm. Show me. Marcus held out the screen. The headline glared back at them both. The secret benefactor, how Ethan Blackwood quietly saved Charlotte Bennett's foundation and why he never said a word. Charlotte's breath caught as she scanned the first paragraph, then the second, her own name staring back at her from a story she hadn't given permission to tell. Ethan, they know everything. The trust, the debts, the lawsuits. I know, he said quietly. This is going to look terrible. People are going to say you bought your way into my life. That none of this was real. Charlotte. He caught her, and before it could pull away. Look at me. Whatever happens in the next 5 minutes, I need you to understand something. I don't regret a single dollar of it. Not the trust, not the deals I turned down, not tonight. If loving you quietly for 5 years costs me my reputation, that's a price I'll pay without blinking. Behind them, the ballroom doors opened, and Adrian Lancaster stepped through, phone in hand. His expression unreadable in a way that made Charlotte's stomach tighten all over again. Well, Adrian said, stopping a few feet away. That escalated faster than I expected. You did this, Ethan said, voice low and controlled in a way that was somehow more menacing than shouting would have been. You leaked the trust documents. I did, Adrian admitted, without a flicker of shame. Though I'll admit, I thought it would take you longer to actually say something to her first. I was hoping the story would break before you found your courage, not after. Charlotte stared at him, betrayal sharpening every word. Why would you do that? Because I wanted to know if he actually loved you, Adrian said simply, or if 5 years of silence meant he never would have said anything at all. I've known Ethan a long time, Charlotte, longer than you'd think, given our family's history. I've watched him build an empire out of never showing weakness. I wanted to see if you were the one thing that could actually crack that. You used me to test him. Charlotte's voice rose, sharp with anger. That's not a game, Adrian. That's my life, my foundation, my name in headlines again. You're right, Adrian said, and for the first time all night. His usual polish slipped into something that looked almost like genuine regret. It was a reckless thing to do, and I'm sorry for the position it put you in. But watch the comments coming in right now, Charlotte. Read what people are actually saying. Marcus, still holding his phone, scrolled instinctively, then went quiet. What? Ethan asked. What does it say? Marcus turned the screen around. Beneath the article, comments were already stacking by the hundreds. Not outrage, not scandal, but something else entirely. This is the most romantic thing I've read all year. A billionaire secretly funding a woman's charity, and never asking for credit. That's not manipulation, that's integrity. Charlotte Bennett deserves this. She rebuilt her entire life from nothing, and someone believed in her enough to protect it quietly. Charlotte's eyes filled as she read line after line, strangers she'd never met defending a truth. She was still struggling to absorb herself. They're not angry, she whispered. No, Adrian said. They're not. Turns out the public has a soft spot for quiet loyalty in a world full of performance. He glanced at Ethan, something almost like respect passing between two men who had spent years as rivals. I owe you an apology, Blackwood. I pushed you tonight because I wanted to see the truth. I didn't expect the truth to be this good. That doesn't excuse what you did, Ethan said, still tense, still protective of the woman beside him. No, it doesn't. But I think tonight worked out better than either of us could have planned. Adrian looked at Charlotte, his expression finally fully sincere. For what it's worth, I hope your foundation gets 10 times the funding after this. You've earned it, whether or not any of this went the way I intended. He stepped back, offering a small, genuine nod, and disappeared back into the ballroom, leaving Ethan and Charlotte alone again on the quiet side of the terrace glass. I still can't believe this is real, Charlotte said, staring down at the phone Marcus had discreetly left in her hands before excusing himself. 5 years. You did all of this and never said a word. I'd do it again, Ethan said. Every bit of it. Even the part where it nearly cost me everything tonight. It didn't cost you anything. Charlotte looked up at him, her voice steadied by something that felt, for the first time in years, like certainty. It gave you something. It gave both of us something we didn't know we still had a right to. And what's that? A second chance to stop pretending. The ballroom doors swung open again. And this time it wasn't Adrian, it was a cluster of guests. Phones raised, eager for a glimpse of the two people at the center of the night's biggest story. Charlotte flinched instinctively, old habits from her divorce rising fast, but Ethan's hand found hers, steady, grounding. You don't have to hide anymore, he said. Not from them. Not from me. I know, she said, and for the first time all night, she meant it completely. The following morning, the headlines had multiplied tenfold, but none of them carried the tone Charlotte had feared. Business networks praised Ethan's quiet philanthropy. Charity organizations reached out in droves, eager to associate with a foundation now impossible to ignore. Donations to the Bennett Foundation tripled within 48 hours. Strangers moved by a story of loyalty that asked for nothing in return, Weeks later, at another gala, smaller, quieter, hosted by neither Lancaster nor Blackwood, but by Charlotte's own foundation, she walked in wearing a deep sapphire gown, confident in a way 3 years of solitude had never quite allowed her to be. This time she didn't walk in alone. Ethan met her at the door, his hand extending not as a billionaire staking a claim, not as a man protecting a secret, but simply as someone who had finally learned that love only meant something when it was spoken out loud. "Ready?" he asked. "Together this time," she said, taking his hand. As they stepped into the room, cameras rising instinctively, Charlotte felt none of the fear that had gripped her the night everything changed. She smiled, steady and sure, and said the only thing that mattered. "This dress never changed who I am. It just finally let the world see who was standing beside me all along." Ethan smiled back, no longer hiding, no longer a man who mistook protection for love. And for the first time in 5 years, neither of them looked away.